Hey guys, this is Dan Watson from learningcameras.com, and I've got the new Sony A7s right here, and I've been playing around with this camera for a little while now. And you know, the Sony A7s brings some awesome capabilities to the original A7 and combines them with a new 12 megapixel sensor. I mean, you got a ton of video features such as zebras, peaking, and it'll record it all internally at up to 60 frames a second at 1080p, or up to 4K at 30 frames a second if you use the external recorder through the HDMI port, which is right on the side here. Now, if you're interested in photography, check out my review of the original A7 and take a look at that, watch some of the low light results, and we'll show you some low light results from the Sony 12 megapixel sensor from that too. And you'll really be able to see the differences comparing those two. The Sony A7 is a great camera. Now, I'm also going to be comparing this to the full frame 5D Mark III, which I have behind me, and the Panasonic GH4, which is what I'm recording this with right now. So for those of you who are on the fence, a ton of cameras to be looking at right now, especially for video. So head to learningcameras.com. I'm going to have a ton of videos on all of these cameras, so you can really keep up with all of them right there, as well as being able to download some of the full resolution files. And you'll also see some links to be able to purchase any of these cameras. So if you use those links, it really helps us keep the lights on, keeps these reviews coming up. So we appreciate your support if you enjoy the review. So enough of that, let's take a look at this camera. Now, when it comes to hardware, the Sony A7s has a really good feel to it. Overall, very good build quality, as we saw with the A7. It's a very small size, a little tough to hold on to in some areas, but the grip is adequate. Almost every button is customizable on this camera, and that's one of the things that I love about it. It's got a 12 option function menu as well to really keep every button that you could ever want at your disposal. These can be activated at any time, even during shooting, which is awesome for video recording. So as a result, I was able to get quick access to every option I could ever hope for right in the camera. And this is even more helpful since the menus are a little bit confusing at times with the Sony. And you know, options are placed awkwardly in different menu settings, so you have to work a little bit to find your way around. Now, we've got microphone in, headphone in, HDMI, all of the inputs and outputs that you could possibly want. You have full control of the audio even while shooting, which is awesome. The electronic viewfinder, which is pretty good quality here, is also very helpful for seeing my exposure in direct sunlight. This is a big issue for cameras like the 5D Mark III, and I normally have to have an external viewer to be able to see that. Right now, just put your eye up to this and you get a real look of what your exposure is even in direct sunlight. When the screen was too washed out to see, it's really, really nice. So, you know, it's light, very well built, so great for weddings that I have to travel with. I can now leave my hoodman at home, so great features on that. Now, this camera also has Wi-Fi built in, and the Wi-Fi is a great addition, and NFC is also in here for easy pairing. And the only complaint that I had is that photographers get full control manually of all of the camera settings. However, videographers on this camera only get start and stop record. It's a little bit limited, but it's still better than cameras like my Canon 70D that gave me Wi-Fi only for photography mode, not even a start-stop for video. You know, my only areas of criticism with this are the noisy strap hooks. These right here, man, these are really annoying. You're going to want to chop these off the first time you try to record handheld. Also, I do wish the screen actually folded out and went to the side. This kind of up-down, a little bit of an angle is okay, better than a fix, but come on, there's so many other cameras that give us that flip-out screen that allow you to see a whole lot more and even see a view if you're ever recording yourself like I'm doing right now. So it's very limited on the range on that. Now, I still feel that the front dial is difficult to focus or to actually activate. It's kind of awkwardly placed and away from the shutter button, so that's something that takes some getting used to. Now, the D-pad, it would often scroll as I was trying to touch those buttons, so that's another thing that for me, there wasn't enough separation. It's very easy to activate the scroll wheel on the back instead of the D-pad, and that can change a lot of your settings while recording. I also have to mention that the new FE lens mount for full frame cameras is extremely limited at this time. Only a handful of rather expensive lenses exist. No f2.8 zooms. This is the 3.5 to 5.6. it's still not even a cheap lens, but you can get the f4 lens. This is a 28 to 70. Now you can use Sony's adapters to use their full frame lenses. That's going to be an option you're almost going to have to go with. However, I hate using those adapters because they take away from some of the great things about this camera, like the small size and having the native lenses that just attach on there. So your focus options also could change with some of those adapters, so keep in mind. Now, getting used to this camera coming from a DSLR will take a little bit of time, but it'll be very rewarding to do so. I mean, you've got a ton of buttons all over this thing, tons of customization, way more than I've ever had on my other cameras, so it's great to see that. You just have to get used to the kind of awkward placement of some of them. Now, in operation, this camera, as you know, has a ton of options, including dual record, AVC-HE, AVC-HD, although only at 24 and 60 frames a second, and it also has Sony's XAVC, which is their higher quality compression format. Now, using XAVC will give you access to 24 frames a second, 30 and 60 at full 1080p with the optional 1080 with an optional 120 frames per second at 720p, which is a great camera for slow motion recording. Now, this camera is limited to 8-bit recording, though you do get full 4.2.2 output over the HDMI if you need. Now, Sony's also built in S-Log2, which is a customizable profile meant for increasing dynamic range and grading ability in post. Now, if you need more information on this, I've got a video and there's quite a bit to know. Overall, S-Log2 does deliver on its promise out of the gate and gave the A7S almost RAW-like capabilities without the longer workflow that I've typically seen with RAW files. However, there's some huge limitations for S-Log2 that might make this unusable for you. And then just remember that these definitely need to be graded. They have no life to them at all coming from the camera like that. Unlike maybe a RAW file from a picture that we would see that gives us the access afterwards to make changes but doesn't look completely lifeless, this is all it is a custom profile for your pictures, and it's very limited in some ways. So you might not want to use that as often as you would think going into this. However, you do have AVC HD and the XAVC. Both of them looked great. The XAVC will more than double your file sizes and also requires a 64 gigabyte or higher card. So make sure to pick up some 64 gigabyte cards because your 32 and under cards are unusable for anything except AVC HD. So keep that in mind. Now, recording is unfortunately limited to about 29 minutes on this camera. Despite it being a camera used for video recording, if you go with the HDMI and go out externally to a recorder, that's the only time you're going to get longer than 29 minutes in camera. Now, speaking of recorders, the elephant in the room here is 4K recording. The Sony A7S is technically capable of 4K, but only with an external recorder. It's due out this fall with a $2,000 price tag and enough bulk to make handheld 4K recording just about impossible. Now, with 4K on the horizon, you might need to consider whether you need 4K recording to future-proof your equipment like this. Limiting you to 1080p recording right now might mean that you're out shopping again in 1 to 2 years for a camera that's capable of in-camera 4K recording. Now, once you get used to things, customize the way that you like, it's really a joy to use this camera. I frequently felt that I had more than enough tools at my disposal, and it was up to me to choose the best ones for the job. Now, one important area for me was focusing. This has been a difficult thing on the 5D3, and at the same time, I've been spoiled with my Canon 70D, and that camera gives me excellent autofocus capabilities no matter what I'm doing. However, the 5D3 one filming, and this is for video, has virtually no capabilities while recording, and you're manually focused only, except without anything like focus peaking. Thankfully, the A7S was a pleasant surprise, and focusing on a single point was very quick, even in low light, and it also gave me a ton of options from area detection, face detection, resizable points. It worked perfectly your face detection worked perfectly as long as your subject is looking at the camera, and individual points could be moved around the frame as needed. Now, tracking was a bit of a mixed bag for me. While the A7S had no issues locking focus quickly, it does take its sweet time while tracking, making it difficult to maintain focus on a moving target. It is very smooth in operation, not as fast, but it's also less clunky than the Canon 70D. But just don't expect it to track someone walking at the camera at a wide aperture. Now, for those interested in good old-fashioned manual focus, the A7S has a ton of features on it. You're talking focus peaking in 3 colors, 3 different levels of intensity. I found that I needed the intensity up high most of the time to see the colors a little bit better. But overall, ton of options when it comes to focusing, no issues at all, other than a little bit of lag when it came to tracking. Now, when it comes to low light, this is where the A7S shines. Flying in the face of the megapixel war, Sony has chosen to keep things a little bit different and put in a 12 megapixel sensor, which allows to bring in much larger light absorbing pixels, and the results were clearly amazing. I found myself shooting a great quality footage at up to 25,000 ISO, which I would have never dared to do previously. And really the results look good up to about 50,000 ISO. And after that, they started to take a little bit of a turn for the worse. Grain starts to sneak in around 16,000 or 1600 ISO, but it's very, very well controlled, and I had no issues using it. Now, full frame sensor does have some issues, and the jello effect and rolling shutter were very pronounced, enough to be noticed in handheld or glide cam footage. You will probably be able to tell that this camera is not the greatest when it comes to that. Now, guess what? The Sony A7S is actually a really good still camera as well for all those looking for some monster pixels soaking up a tremendous amount of dynamic range. I mean, low light results for photographers were equally stunning, with the autofocus being quick and accurate, plenty of options. I did find the lack of FE lenses even a bigger deal when shooting photography. I mean, without an f2.8 zoom or any kind of wide aperture primes that are really available other than one at f1.8, I found it difficult to shoot the way I would normally shoot my full frame cameras like my 5D Mark III. You know, Sony does have the adapter and they made it available. I think it's about $350, and it's going to be a must-have accessory, especially if you're using this for photography. Overall, the Sony A7S is a great camera, especially for video. Now, Sony has challenged the industry in so many ways that the A7S feels like a no-compromise camera, unlike some of my Canon models. It really feels like all of the limitations are technology related and not that Sony was holding back on this camera at all. All of the options that I want are there. Unfortunately, there were still many glaring issues that kept coming up at every turn. You know, the lack of FE lenses, I'll say it again, adding to the fact that you need to have a higher price tag on this to get that, takes away from the form factor being small and the portability. The lack of 4K is actually kind of a big deal. You know, not necessarily now because I don't see myself mastering the 4K, but as the future becomes 4K, it is going to be the new standard and you might be looking at upgrading. However, I do enjoy being able to crop and stabilize my 4K footage, though it might be possible with a 4K with the output recorder at $2,000 sometime in the future, but for many, that just won't be enough. And the fact remains that in 1 to 2 years, 4K recording will be a new high-end standard, and A7S owners will have some serious gear envy when it comes to that. The Sony A7S is one of the most amazing cameras I've used. It definitely is a low-light king with all of the features that I could want. Would I buy one? I don't know. Would I use one? Absolutely. If you don't mind a camera for today and don't mind using a lens adapter, the Sony A7S is going to be a great camera for you. In 1 to 2 years, you might have some gear envy, but over the next 1 to 2 years, you're going to enjoy this camera. So remember to head to learningcameras.com. I've got all the information right up there. We've got a written review up there as well and some pictures and videos from this camera as well. Keep in mind we've got that GH4 comparison with the A7S and the 5D Mark III versus the A7S coming up, so you're going to be able to see some of those differences. So hope you enjoy, and we'll see you again soon.